All right, welcome to our Alchemical Alignment. What do we call this? Info evening. So glad you could make it. Really appreciating that you're here. I thought I would share a little bit about the map of seven realms. What does that mean? And then also a little bit about the training program and take questions that arise for you at the time and possibly hear from some grads about what it's like being them, having been through the program, if at any point anyone's ready to say anything who is here. So, what I'd love to start with is the idea that when we all went to school, many of us went to programs where going up into fight and flight and down into rest and digest was all we ever knew. And that's the old theory that we would like to discard and say, oh, wow, that was really simple. And it also led to great misunderstandings and people not being able to recognize themselves in their lives. One story is a friend of mine is moving and she got a diarrhea problem for months. She's an older person who had really difficult things happen in childhood, including leaving because of war her homeland through many different great difficulties. And so I said to her, what if your body is responding with great difficulty on an emotional level, a stress level, and it's unable to be recognized? And so everybody goes to look for matter, for something material, in order to diagnose and give a drug about that. The other thing that happened to her was that her brain stopped working. And so she was doing some things by rote, and some things got missed because of the holes that were there in her leaky gut and her brain not functioning. And then in the fight and flight and rest and digest experience, the question is, where does that whole story fit? Is she having some kind of a fight and flight? Is she having some kind of rest and digest in that story? Now we know that there is freeze somewhere in the story. And that's what's going on with her holes inside. And so when we start to feel for, wow, on a map, where would I put freeze? It would be lower than rest and digest, wouldn't it be? Because that's the rest and digest is when you have function and relaxation. But if you turn things down in terms of function too far, you drop down into freeze zones, which is exactly how the researcher, was it Stephen Porges, described it when they said too much of a good thing, relaxation, is really a bad thing. What is this freeze thing? So, really appreciating his research to show us what is going on inside of freeze. Where we start in the program is with the range of regulation of health. Most trauma programs that I ever went to started with trauma. And so we would go right up into fight and flight, or we would have in your face type of experiences of what's going on with you now. And for sensitive practitioners who are incredibly amazing and wonderful and already have a lot going on themselves, they might need a little bit more space, a little bit more time, a little bit more slowing down, a little bit more stabilization on the way into a doable piece of trauma resolution work. And so we slow everything down and we begin to study range of regulation, what's going on in slower, medium, and fast parts of the range of regulation. And lots of practitioners coming into the program realize, my goodness, I don't think I've ever really studied the slow, medium, and fast. And this wonderful question of, is the middle of the range and a healthy portion of the range ever studied by practitioners to become larger than and maybe even more rich than the whole range of trauma in the hyper and hypo zones? And who has time for that these days? Who has time to not be in survival mode or fighting for existence or managing symptoms? Who has time? And how do you get there to build a larger range of regulation. That's one of the things we study also, is how do you return to it over and over again? How do you, we have a sustainable living formula actually that helps to study how to enlarge the range of regulation. As I've already pointed out, we have hyper zones up into fight and flight up above the range of regulation, and then down below hypo zones when we go down into freeze. You might ask the question, who am I when I'm not in the threat response? Who am I when I'm in the range of regulation? Who still can I be for the rest of my life when I become more and more and more of me and my true self? Notice in yourself, even as you're asked the question, what is it, what images or sensations come? Who am I and who could I still be? Are such lovely questions, which could take us out of a negativity bias, which could take us out of ruts of looping, looking at a symptom, or looping or stuck in a double bind, looking at the past, or just lost without any thoughts, lost maybe in some kind of unworthiness, or unable to expand into what can be. This kind of language feels like it could be too heavy, could be too much to say, oh, who could I still be? Like, Brigit, what planet are you on? Are you looking at current events? Are you looking at the state of my life? Doesn't that sound like Pollyanna thinking or something that is going to set me up for failure because I start to feel like I could get somewhere and then I crash into despair or dissociation or depression or something like that. And the only reason that why I can speak with a small smile or some enthusiasm is because I've seen people over and over and over and over again come through the program, come through this style of work, and become more of themselves and feel fabulous. And if not feel fabulous, start in doable increments, moving towards some sense of relating to what has tethered them, what has held them back from what's possible. So you say, where are the 7 realms? Let me tell you where the 7 realms are. We have medium, fast, and slow health, 1, 2, and 3 in the middle. We go up into fight or flight, up to 4, A and B. We go down to freeze, 5, A and B. And you say, what's A and B? A is the temporary one when you go there to save your life and return. And B is when you go there and you get stuck. Something gets stuck and imprinted. If you are an adult and you get an imprint and you have a single event trauma, that's where there are therapies where you hear about miracles like EMDR and tapping took care of my difficulty. As far as I understand, they are most successful with adult single event traumas. The style of work that we are doing will meet an adult single event trauma. It will also meet deeper and deeper and deeper layers, all the way to what is called what we call epic, which means multi-layered. Like I have a repeating, you might say, I have a repeating, echoing pattern through my whole lifetime. And as I begin to look at my trauma history, I'm recognizing, oh, wow, I have a repeated flight, or have a repeated emptying of self, or have a repeated something that's showing up in a current symptom. But wow, I could point at it 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Wow, there's a certain way that it shows up repeating along my entire life. And if you happen to be an intuitive person, or somehow spirit has opened up this information for you, you could also notice that the repeating pattern could also be in a previous lifetime. Or if you begin to take a look at your ancestors, you could be like, oh my goodness, I am repeating a pattern that Uncle so-and-so had, and didn't great grandfather, great grandmother so-and-so also have that? Oh my goodness, repeating patterns start to become apparent as you get a larger view of fields. your own self in a current time field, a karmic or other lifetime field, ancestral fields. There's a toroidal field of time and space and self and subject, and they all dovetail perfectly for imprints when they are epic to be repeating patterns that at first may look random, but over time you begin to recognize, oh, I'm dealing with something that's repeating. And as I have more capacity, more potency to be able to meet something in relationship, wow, I, some of these people feel like they're superheroes in the Olympics meeting a large repeating pattern. And it's just so incredible to witness the people doing their work and meeting with more efficiency and more potency over the years, larger repeating patterns. And the other half of the title of Alchemical Alignment is trauma resolution and embodiment of spirit. And so the more trauma resolution you get to do, the more embodiment of spirit begins to loop in, and you can expand into who you still can be in this lifetime. I understand doesn't matter how old you might be, it's never too late to move into the superhero aspect of yourself, or the flavor of divinity, being able to flow through yourself, which may sound unreachable for somebody who's feeling depressed or feeling like chronic pain will never let me go there. The double bind of, yeah, I should do something about this. Yeah, I can't do anything about this. In our map of 7 realms, we're on our way towards seeing where double binds fit. So I'll just mention that we had the range of regulation or resonance. We had the hyperzone and the hypozone. We have a looping zone where it's really hard to get out of it. You just stay in it, stay in it, stay in it, stay in it. It's kind of like try to stabilize yourself and then zoom, you're dragged right back into it. There's a looping area in somatic experiencing, also called global high intensity activation. And then beyond that is the double bind zone, where it could be a hot double bind or a cold double bind, which means there are two equal and opposite energies that are both true. Part of the superhero path is working with the truth of both sides of that. The double bind feels like a dead end for people. Like, yeah, I need to eat something differently. I can't eat anything differently. Yeah, I need to, or I must move this body. I can't move this body, or I need to be embodied to do my work or my life's work or achieve any of my goals. I can't be embodied because of pre-existing conditions in here. There's no chance. And so that's one of the greatest pieces of news, is that even with the impossible, slowly over time, we move toward, with small doable bits and small exercises and practices and pieces of theory and like tiny steps at a time, we move from the impossible into a new range of regulation, which is very exciting. The cold double bind and olive freeze will have some kind of death wrapped up into it. And so the cold double bind can be at this dreary place where you just heard the I must, I can't, I must, I can't, where there's still energy in there. As it drops down into the freeze, into the cold place, there's a sense of forgetting. Did I have to do something? There was something important about embodiment. There was something important about changing my eating habits. I can't remember anymore. Or body, there is no body. Yourself, there is no self. As the things drop down into the cold double bind area, it's just like a forgotten imperative that I had to do something, but I can't quite make it there anymore. And that's part of what gets awakened in people through various healing modalities, through various new experiences that they have. And sometimes, like falling in love, will have you drift right through the grave difficulties to a range of regulation. However, if attention is not paid to what got the people there in the first place, they may end up back there again. And the fresh love that people were feeling ends up generally not being enough to heal all of the things that the fresh love got them out of temporarily, which is a pattern you can see in some people of like, oh, my new girlfriend helped me get out of that terrible pattern. And from a practitioner standpoint, ooh, good luck to the new girlfriend within 6 to 12 months. Because the old pattern, it may be latent and waiting. All right, welcome. We've just made it through a description of the map of 7 realms, where we're describing the richness of health. We're describing difficulties of hyper and hypo experiences. We're describing where looping up in hyper places can feel just impossible. Like, I can't land, I can't land, I can't get down. What do I do with this pattern? And then how it turns into double binds that are hot and cold when the appropriate relationship, the appropriate attention does not get paid to these things, or stacks of stressors get built on top of these things, which is why systemic difficulties can be seen to be landing on top of people where they may have had a simple problem, like a simple medical issue, simple enough, but then a systemic difficulty like can't get insurance, can't get medical care, can't get something. The weight of the stacks of difficulties will drive the most disadvantaged members of society toward hot and then cold double binds. And so systemically becoming aware of that. That's where a lot of the most disadvantaged people end up, is at the outskirts of our maps. Another thing that wanted to be said today was that there are a lot of people who teach from the range of regulation. And so they're like, oh, all you need to do is sit with your trauma, don't turn away from it, sit in the stream of difficulty and land in this place of the hero having gotten through there. They may have no clue and no training that says, if you're talking to somebody who's looping or somebody who's in the double binds or somebody who's down in the freeze, they can't hear you. And so the mind over matter and the will-based strategies will re-injure those people. And generally they'll feel more shame or grief, because the method where the shiny people seem to be attracted to and moving through, those methods aren't reaching the ones on the outskirts of the map. Pausing. If you have questions, please add them to the chat, or you could say them out loud. Or complaints or suggestions or something. I'm going to go next to the 5 depths of freeze to have mentioned them at all. I'm forever grateful to Catherine Duclea, who introduced me to the top 3 levels: owl, deer, and opossum. And then fake and extinct showed up in my practice over and over and over again, so that I just had to include them. Usually they show up backwards. Usually they show up when somebody's coming out of freeze in your session. And so they're easiest to recognize as they're melting toward the range of regulation. I recently worked with a person who had 4 different imprints along her torso. And the first thing that she said was, I walked out of, I was in nature and my family saw that I had something poisonous on me. Trying to change the story enough to be anonymous. And so the I, who had just been there, it felt to me as I was tracking her that there was nobody there until the family saw the being, saw that her with the poisonous thing. And so I was feeling for, wow, did we just come out of extinct? The one who was terrified of the thing that was on her has disappeared from reality. And then soon after that, as we were attending to that, she said something about a wall at her heart. And for me, it made sense that there would be a wall. If there's a poisonous thing, you would want to protect the heart and you would want the grave difficulty not to make it to the heart. And so the body goes so far as to throw in something that you might say is fake. The wall showed up, I think she may have said concrete. And she, at that point, also mentioned an ancestral trauma where they had been killed. And it's fascinating how a childhood event can link in to a similar pattern from generations before when the person is describing their experience, or when a practitioner is perceiving them and the practitioner is intuitive or experienced in such a way that they're like, wow, I'm reaching something that feels like a wall with my perception, with my contact, with my skills to feel what is there. And so extinct to the wall. And then the next thing that she mentioned was feeling frozen in her torso, mentioning that years before that she'd had a surgery and a cast as well. And so there wasn't any chance for escape. So here she is in inescapable conditions. And in the inescapable conditions, the torso is frozen, the heart is being protected, the whole being had disappeared. But as she's melting toward the possibility of mobilization, there's immobility. And she described it as something cold, more icy, or even dead feeling, which is our third depth of freeze. The opossum one is where the opossum plays dead in order to avoid being eaten, being the prey. And soon after that, she mentioned an emotion coming through, which is dear. When the movement of mind, the movement of emotion, the movement of mobilization, which wasn't available to her, but the emotion started to come through, whether it was fear or grief or I'm not remembering shame in her session right now. It was several weeks ago, but I'm remembering that it was definitely an emotional movement and also understanding of the level of grave danger. By the time you're in the third, fourth, and fifth depths of freeze, there's not going to be a lot of emotion or caring. Like, oh, the extinct one is not having the experience of, I would love to live, or something like that. Down in the depths of freeze, there's a lack of emotional resonance or really understanding the grave nature of how close to death one has gotten. And then what she said beyond that was that in the fear of moving, she was starting to realize that as she would move and live more, she would be exposed to more danger, which is a very common experience of the owl, one that would like to remain camouflaged, might like to go back into the other layers of freeze. Like, couldn't I go back there again? There was relief there because I didn't have the sensations. Sometimes even pain is moving through these layers. It was more anesthetized to be deeper down in the freeze. Could I go back, please? And so the protection and the nurturing and the nourishment in tiniest bits of the ones who are coming into the higher layers of freeze is incredibly important so that they don't feel rushed or pushed into a new vulnerability, a new injury, because that's where recapitulation often happens, where like an idealistic young practitioner might say, oh, look, you've made it all the way here and let's go take our first steps and we could walk around the block and da, 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 and pick up the pace just a little bit too fast, start goal setting or, whatever it might be. And so it was so tender at the end of the session. She was saying to me, what do we do? What do we do? And I said, what do we do with somebody who's just had a shock? Could we just be here? Could you have a nap? Could you slow down? Could we have a little rest? And I did actually see her again later, and she said, that one's been resting since then. Like, don't tell anybody. It's a new joy for her that she's been able to work with that aspect of self, slowly allowing that one to come out of freeze. It's so beautiful when people can move slowly with that. All right, so what we've done is we've described the map of 7 realms, the 5 depths of freeze. I'm curious what questions and comments you might have at this point. Yeah, hi, Jenna.
Hi. Um, I have started reading your book, so I think I already actually know this. I left it in Portland, and that's why it's taken me so long. I can't wait for the audiobook, though, first of all. So where does like a charged up functional freeze live in this? Where you're like frozen but anxious,
Yeah, it may be that deer level
Mhm.
where I know I'm ready to mobilize, can't mobilize, ready to mobilize, can't mobilize. It also can be that's a little bit more of a simple visit to freeze. The double bind of I come out, I go back in, I come out, I go back in can be more chronic, I would say. The syndromal ones, what is called syndromal within somatic experiencing, and also they have chronic, probably all of the people listening to this have something that's syndromal. I'm sorry to say, and welcome. Um, the hot double binds are often the ones where you can go to the top of spinning and you can go to the bottom of cold if you have a little room in it. And then once you get bound deeper into it, you don't have a lot of movement in there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Like there's two speeds, like way up here or just collapse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And then there are ways that our lives are set up to rev us up and then have us collapse. And sometimes we get ourselves into a range of regulation that's working well enough, like getting the foods dialed in right, or the movement dialed in right, or, oh, there's a new practice and it's really working for me, something like that. And the range begins to grow a little bit. And then it's a curious thing which stressors may collapse the range or which activities may rocket ship us out of there and then drop us down into the collapse. Sometimes what happens is there's a sequence of events, and within the sequence, there's a warble within us, an imprint that we carry with us to every part of our lives that we go to, and we hit that, and then and you can start to map your very own sequence of events, especially visible in life thresholds like graduations, paper due, some for some people mortgage due or something like that. When there are deadlines and thresholds to meet, there is often a pattern that you can see. Um, and sometimes it's exactly what happened at your birth from a somatic perspective, which is what the Castellino pre and perinatal training is all about. Um, for 3 years, you can study the greatest details of births and your own patterns. We visit this in a segment called Threshold Dynamics. And so you get the information through this program as well. But if you want to deepen into an entire birth training, that's available in California. Yeah. Yeah. What else should we talk about? What else? What other questions might you have to? Please, well, let's just talk all afternoon. I'm happy to talk about it all.
So tell me how this program is a great counterpart to and differs from SE,
Yeah.
somatic experiencing.
Thank you. Um, people who have taken SE have gone through this program and said, my goodness, I think I just came to finishing school. One man said that he was so grateful he had done both programs, and he, couldn't know who he would be if he had only taken this one program. And so, how do you ever know? For me, there, especially for the frozen people, the sensitive people, the some of the people who come are a little bit more hermit-like, and they've had to become that way because of chronic symptoms they're managing. Often for me, in the somatic experiencing exercises that I was participating in, I would have like 20 steps of rich things that were happening before we got to the exercise. Like even the fact that this exercise is about eyes. Ooh! Or like anybody has eyes. Ooh! And the waves of things that would happen for the completion of deeper pieces of threat responses inside the security system. I'm so grateful to be able to drop the titration down toward homeopathic doses. And that tends to be what will melt freeze more efficiently and quickly to slow it down. Thank you for asking. Also, this program is immediately relational and energetic in such a way that biodynamic craniosacral and Aikido skills are used from the very first day. And so the finding of right distance or the placement of the bodies or the recognition of threat from even being with a person is already a big deal. Some of these steps might be skipped in other training programs because the focus isn't quite so much that people are dangerous. And so, how do you have a relational program while acknowledging that people might be the danger? Is a fascinating question. And so, I would say that the majority of people who have come through alchemical alignment have had some kind of interpersonal danger. And the fascinating piece for those who are body workers is that most body work is taught mechanically for you to be able to lift and turn something mechanically. And after some kind of an impact injury, it's so great to have those skills to be able to realign structure. However, if your very being of a person is the danger for the client, and that's never acknowledged, my goodness, how does anyone ever get anywhere with a client who has to tolerate what feels like terror or burning or something in reaction to somebody working with their body? The double bind of, I have to go to a practitioner. I can't stand people. I can't be touched. This is so intimate. You're immediately opening to all of my greatest depths. People with existential level imprints can open to their greatest depths with casual contact with a practitioner in the room. If we don't have that level of trauma training for our practitioners, there's re-traumatization happening all the time because of the way training has happened. To have the practitioner be the expert, to have the practitioner know what they're doing, but not necessarily take into account that the client, the customer, the patient paying the money, has an entire world of experience going on inside. I trained in some training programs where 60 minutes after doing all sorts of things with hands-on, we say, how are you now? Or what's going on with you now? 60 rich minutes of massive amounts of experiences going on. It takes a special practitioner with trauma training to be relational at any moment in a session. As much of an expert as one might be, and as intuitive and telepathically communicating with the body as one might be, to be able to have social engagement with a client at any point of the session, even if you have 30 minutes of silence of fabulous body work or osteopathic work or other kinds of work going on, if there's not a communication channel open, this immediately can call up abandonment and neglect and other such trauma patterns inside the client. For me, this was very true as I lied still through 15, 60 minute, 15, 30, 60, 120-minute sessions that were meant to be silent, recognizing how many times as the practitioner was having an experience, here's me lying on the table and I can feel my practitioner's state the whole time as a sensitive being. And as they go closer to what they might be feeling as regulated parasympathetic, where they're chilling out, and supposedly the effect of them chilling out helps my system down regulate and the HPA axis get happier, supposedly. Meanwhile, my body is saying, are you drunk driving? Are you falling asleep at the wheel? I start having acid baths go through my body. Practitioner doesn't know any of that. Communication channel is not necessarily open. Can I say that to any practitioner? Or do I lie there thinking, where's my next session coming from? This one's not working. The ability to have communication channels open and know what to do with the communication that arises and to know what metaphors are arising and where they belong on the map. All of that is massively important for practitioners with trauma training. And which client coming to see any one of us doesn't have some trauma in the background? And so, as far as I'm concerned, I'd love for everyone to know the map of 7 realms and all the skills we teach. Yeah. Yeah. What else? What else?
I have a question.
Please.
I'm wondering if you might comment on people who actually have a background in trauma training through maybe psychotherapy, social work, but yet working with soma might be the new edge for them.
I would love for you to answer that question, but I'd be happy to. I could ask you questions as well. Here, everybody, that's Kimberly Clark, who will be teaching our Maine and Maryland programs. The first year program, Kimberly has just taught with Joseph Sane online, and we're going back to in-person starting this fall, which is very exciting that Kimberly's willing to do that. That's so great, with a vast amount of experience of in-person trainings. Yeah. And so in order to answer your question, it's a fascinating question. What is the scope of anyone's practice? Is it mostly mental? Many of the people, or is it mostly spiritual for the spiritual people? Many of the people coming to somatic work have become downright psyche experts and spiritual masters in order to deal with the somatic symptoms they have going on chronically. You may know your coherent narrative. You may have been through any number of emotions or relational pieces with family members, but it's not reaching the terrified one who had surgery at age 3. That's the somatic piece that gets added to already brilliant practitioners, full practices, but yet they feel like there are aspects of their clients they're not quite able to reach. It's where the holes are, it's where the terror is, it's where the body says no, or it too quickly says yes. The extremes of hyper and hypo experiences in the body, or the vast stucknesses of the body, where mentally you may know everything about a subject. You may know everything there was ever to know, and you've studied it up and down, and like the people who have become experts on their path toward working with the issue that is with them forever. And yet the symptom has not necessarily changed at all. Another amazing thing that we have in our program is the ability to recognize fields and slowly over time develop into practitioners who can begin to hear what's mine, what's being contributed to from lineage, what's being contributed to from other lifetimes, what's being contributed to from cosmic aspects. There are several people who are incredibly intuitive and receive this information. And when your practice, which is mental, spiritual, or somatic, does not reach the unseen, no matter what kind of unseen it is, there's still room to grow within your practice. The most difficult somatic symptoms that are intractable tend to come from inescapable experiences which were invisible and which felt infinite, like they wouldn't be stopped, and they felt intimate. And there's one more I in there somewhere, but the inescapable and invisible are two of the words that like are super creepy. And you may go to a wordless place for those ones. As much as you might have a coherent narrative, as much as you might have a logical understanding of everything, when something proves to be beyond logic, it is often somatic, which would mean experiential, which would mean we need these skills and this map to recognize where the person is and to be able to work with anything that's arising, whether we can put it into a category or not. And so we're at this place of a meeting of the physiology, the psyche, the unconscious, the shadow, the spirit, the energy, relationships. All of these things meet together right here in this map and in the experiential work. Yeah. Kimberly, would you tell us a little bit about reflexes and how you got into this work, and what are reflexes and what do they have to do with alchemical alignment? How did they come together?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And this even goes back to Genoa's earlier question. So I'm an occupational therapist for 30 years. And part of being an OT rather than a physical therapist is supposed to be this awareness of holding more of a holistic background of physical well-being and mental well-being. So I've trained over the years with lots of various bodywork modalities, including energy work. And eventually, in my journeys, I decided to learn about infant primary reflexes. They somewhat fit within my scope of practice. And I said, why not? They seem interested. And so I studied and taught that work for a number of years. And it just so happens that I was holding a lot of really deep knowledge about how the sympathetic or the parasympathetic actually form in the body through our first year or two of life through our reflexes. They all have survival aspects. And I brought that in with me while I sat in my alchemical alignment training as a student, where I would listen to you, Brigit, talk about things like a fight or flight response, where there might be push, or there might be an activation of the legs, or there could be a freeze response. And I think one day I just said, there's reflexes that actually pair up with much of what you're describing. There are early life reflexes that govern our response with push or pull or grasp or anything that might help to metabolize stress hormones in the body, or teach us how to move our legs and arms in a way that we can run away and climb a tree.
What I didn't understand when you first were talking about it was that there's an actual zone in the body paired with the brain, and there's a whole zone. For me, at one point, they lit up as green, like here's a whole green pathway. There's a whole zone that could be turned off, or it could be hyper. I didn't understand when you started describing it that it's so deep also at the level of basic function that as somebody can hold these things and restore the function there, all of life can change. I'm so appreciative that you've brought these.
It's part of our physiology. That's an actual blueprint, that there's a sensory place, there's a place you could touch, or there's a movement that you can do that speaks to this pathway so that it can still be used as a tool, it can still be accessed for bringing forth a response in the body. So the reflex information that I know of is slowly being woven into this material, including the two reflexes that you mentioned, Genoa, the Moro, which is our sympathetic fight or flight response, our initial fight or flight response. Yep. And then we have another response that's our fear paralysis response. It's even more primitive than Moro. And it's been my experience that they can be coupled together. It's akin to having a foot on the gas and the brake at the same time, where most people might think the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems work in opposition. So it's foot on the brake or foot on the gas. But because these reflexes can be stuck in a hyper place at the same time, it's that intense activation. And also an overlay of freeze can come on in that state. So yes, I've seen them both coupled as a reflex and more.
And so imprints that happen when you're an adult, I started to say, are the ones that are easier to reach because they're fresh and recent. And you can imagine something affecting an oak acorn will affect the entire tree, but something affecting the end of the branch is affecting the end of the branch. Similarly, yes, we are holographic beings. And as I receive an injury along one hand, it is not striking to the deepest core of me unless I have core imprints, and the thing on my finger will go so deep to become existential if I have early timeline imprints left over. So that's part of what we get to in our second year of our training, is the things that are, we slowly work our way back along the timeline, and we slowly get more and more familiar with freeze states and also responses to deaths throughout our lifetime. And moving back along the timeline, the deaths that happened early along the timeline tend to leave imprints that are unfinished that we can still reach today. And it's so fulfilling to be able to work with somebody in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and be able to reach something and watch everything realign itself when it had built itself around a certain pattern of loss, of death, of terror, of many early things that leave the fight, flight, and freeze coupled together. One thing we haven't mentioned in here also yet is social engagement and the ability for humans to engage with each other. Thank God that anybody has the experience of falling in love to have a larger range of regulation and a sense of self and possibilities and things that happen there. This is what Bruce Lipton will talk about over and over and over again. How do you live your life closer to falling in love? How do you live your life where there's a new, fresh, exciting something happening? That's going to be what changes the genetics. That's going to be what changes epigenetic patterns, because of the field in which you are living. The field in which you are creating is dependent on your state, and the patterns that you bring with you from your ancestral field. Your trauma responses are inherited and will keep you creating the 3D reality of a body and a reality around you based on what has been, until you work with what has been and you can then move toward becoming what can be. And so social engagement can be turned off for many, many reasons, for trauma reasons in your history, as you have range of regulation, there's more chance of having social engagement as you go further into threat responses up or down, or the looping or syndromal ones. You have less and less capacity for authentic social engagement. You may still have to, like for work purposes, you may have to power through and be kind to somebody. We're talking about the authentic self, and who even has one of those, the ability to rehabilitate and sense and develop or find for the first time ever sometimes the authentic self on the inside and engage socially from there. Like, who does that? The very special people do that, which are people who come to this type of thing because they do have a heart and they may want longevity in their profession, and the stresses that pile on or the traumas that pile on make it that much more difficult to have the authentic, easeful social engagement that we might want to have. And practitioners will default to early timeline attachment patterns. And if you are a golden child taking care of everyone around you, that may become your source, where you're sourcing your kindness from for your practice. Part of what we study is, how do I avoid using the golden child, or using the child who needed to serve, or using whatever attachment pattern there was that was exploiting you or trying to be so incredibly good? How do we avoid sourcing your current practitioner professional life from there and find a different source in current time that's reliable and that you can return to over and over again, that can become a steady part of your life, no matter what that means for you? Not belonging to a cult and having somebody else tell you what it is. This is your own journey to find what that is for you. Yeah. See you later. Thanks for coming. Great. I'm so curious if there are any questions.
Can I just ask a question? Hi,
Of
Kimberly.
course. You're so welcome.
My name is Andrea, and I'm a psychologist. I completed the somatic experiencing training, and I know Kimberly, who I love, through the reflex integration. And I feel like my question has to do more with I'm trying to understand like what your program is with the things that I'm doing, and how you're presenting it. So, for example, I have some touch training with somatic experiencing. Are you familiar with Kathy Kane?
Yeah.
I'm also a PT and an OT in my former life, and reflex integration. And I'm just imagining, and I'm sorry I missed the beginning of this, but like how are you in the room with someone? How are you because I'm putting these pieces together, and I'm just curious as to what you're adding. It sounds really lovely, but
Yeah.
I missed the beginning. I apologize, but would love to hear.
Yeah. A lot of the people who come to the program say every single program I ever took before was all about my clients. And actually, the therapeutic use of self has been one of the most important parts of this program, where practice after practice, theory piece after theory piece, we apply it to ourselves first. And so the alchemy first is happening with the practitioner themselves. One person came and said, we call them the outside person and the inside person, who's a practitioner and client, because they're two people actually. And so it's raising to a new level the client aspect of me. It's also taking from expert place the practitioner and saying, wow, as outside person, I'm going to have my perceptions and maybe my blind spots, and I'm going to be working with you in tandem. And the inside person is brought a new level of respect and slowness, and in the curiosity together. Most people are saying things like, I've actually never gotten this deep before with any of the work that I've done. It's because probably of us slowing down and bringing many principles like mutual support and cooperation, or the ability to pause at any time. These are Castellino principles from pre and perinatal work that are woven into every part of our program. Choice at any moment, consent at any moment, where in the choice, even if I agreed to be in the practice, it doesn't mean that I'm going to ever get to what we're doing. I may need to pause. I may need to do something. So it's a living, breathing moment, as opposed to, you know what, we're going to get to the protocol step number 4 today, something like that. So people have been saying it's at a higher level of consciousness than other things they've done because of the interaction that's real and in present time. A lot of people have said their practices change to more of a population that they're fed by, and they're just loving who's coming. Like, oh my goodness, there's more joy in the professional practice than there had been. I'm wondering, Kimberly, what else you would say about that, if there's anything else.
My practice took a significant up-leveling, had a significant up-leveling, I feel, after I learned this work. And it actually didn't matter what I was doing as a practitioner, whether that was a typical bodywork session or a craniosacral session, or I was working with reflexes or whatever, that the skills and the presence, the practitioner skills that I thought I actually had, all the practitioner skills I needed. Like, I've done so many trainings, like my wall is filled with trainings, but I learned techniques and I learned hands-on modality and I learned mental frameworks to apply to my clients. But what I actually learned in my alchemical alignment training was my embodiment, showing up to support someone in their process, and embodiment was up-leveled in some ways that it took a while to actually feel tangible. I remember going through the program, looking back, realizing I didn't even recognize how much I was changing and growing and learning myself, never mind something I was doing for my clients. And so, because that was a process that I got to go through, and I got to learn things that I could apply to me so deeply, my presence now with others, I think is different. And that's not just professional, that's personal as well. And you might appreciate this, having also come through some of the reflex training where we got to meet, that I remember teaching people how to work with Moro, fear paralysis, some of the reflexes, and I would see people on the table, the inside people actually having a big response. And then the practitioner who was working with them also started having their big response. So they might go into fight or flight because the person on the table was having difficulty. Or I would see the practitioner going into freeze because they actually didn't have skills themselves, no fault of their own. It just isn't part of training or background to actually meet someone. So they might go into freeze if that was their tendency. And so I would go around the room putting out fires or putting on blankets over and over again, because it was just happening everywhere, because the basic practitioner skills of how do you show up to meet someone wasn't there. And so I find this work can be applied to whatever it is that you do. If you're human, it applies to you. If you're part human, part celestial being, it might apply to you.
Yeah. Another thing that we work with is 3-2-1 rehab, which is where theoretically and spiritually people may have rich lives, and we have this question: how much of it is coming into the body? How much of it is coming into the manifestation on this plane, how much of it can come into relationships, small doable pieces at a time. The gorgeous states that we can reach through meditation or through education is that really manifesting into life. So I think making practical steps and bringing things down into the 3D is also a part of what we're up to. Yeah. Yeah. In the first 7 modules in the first year, we work with small doable pieces for working with self and other adults. And then in the second year, we move more toward more intense states and subjects, death and early timeline work. And we're planning more spirit levels that have to do with more esoteric subjects and danger within the unseen in that way. So we start quite practically at the beginning, with small doable steps for working with things that haven't been reached yet for people. Yeah. One of the things we also do is taking a masculine weighted world, which might have theory and thought and protocol and practices in more mind and will based ways. And we add more yin, more feminine, and over time balance out the masculine and feminine within the practitioner, which is an interesting thing to take a look at, of how is that available in each person and what choices do they have? Do they want to develop more of the masculine part of themselves and also the feminine? Because it ends up being incredibly healthy to have both of them available. Part of the program is practitioner alignment sessions where we have movement and meditation for the sake of preparing for a day of work, which I just love that we offer, because like, who does that? And so that's online, and all of the recordings have now been gathered over the last 2.5 years of weekly recordings of those. And so many people have told me the library is an invaluable resource to prepare or to integrate something. Like if there's been a hard day at work or there's been an incredibly difficult session, they intuitively scan through the titles of all the practitioner alignments and find one that speaks to them and like recover self after difficult work. And some of us have really difficult practices where big things may come up. How does a practitioner recover from that less expensively than seeing a practitioner a few times a week in order to re-regulate? And the more regulated we are and the more powerful we are, the more amazing our sessions are. And so practicing in such a way that life and work are resonant is something we're moving toward also. Yeah. Another fun part of the program is that we have 5 teachers now teaching adjunct classes. I think it's 5. We have an Alchemical Alignment 101, where Varia Eroshina is teaching a 6-segment class for an introduction. So you don't have to dive into the first year program if you want to learn the map of 7 realms in more detail and how to apply that to self and eventually clients. Much of our work is based on biodynamic craniosacral tides. And so we have the ability to work with the fluid body, which is this thing that sounds esoteric at first, but everybody eventually gets to feel it. And Joseph Sain will be teaching the magic of the tides. It's a way to work in a quantum fashion, moving through time and space and body areas. And that's a fun adjunct class that's coming in November. Another one is our reflex class with Kimberly. There's going to be a reflex in person in October and also online in February. And we're developing in-person mix of skills for something we're calling Reflex 2, but may also be called Constellations plus Reflex. We'll find out. We'll be doing that later this month. Kimberly Clark, Paulette Robinson, and Brigit Viksnins coming together to do in-person practical work. We'll start in Portland, Maine at the end of July, 27, 28 probably. More information about that to come. Paulette Robinson will teach a Leaving the Trauma Field class this fall and Fields class starting in January, which is a really fun, exciting class for a practitioner to be able to differentiate, show me cause level of the symptom that I'm working with. Some of the most intractable symptoms started preconception. They started before this body was even forming. And so they're laced through the core when they're that old. And so even the words preconception somatics, what are you talking about? It's so fun to be able to reach beyond this one timeline. Tell me who else I'm forgetting at this moment. Allison Bobiel's Feldenkrais class, Feldenkrais for melting freeze. She's done a breathing focus and a posture focus. And then next one in the fall is walking. And then she's doing one for early timeline, which I'm interested to attend. Also, I used her recordings one day. I used like 3 in a row. I was so melted and different by the time I'd done 3 of the recordings in a row. It was so fun. I'm so glad that I signed up for that class. Will you tell me if I'm missing any one of the adjunct classes? I don't think so. Apologies to anyone whose class I'm missing at this point. And our book, The Map of 7 Realms, is a thing to mention because Heather Gordon and I worked on that for a long time, and Heather's brilliance took the way that I taught it and put it into the small doable pieces, and she wrote it so beautifully. So I taught it and she wrote it, and then we went back and forth in discussions about, and how would we write this part, and how, and she would call or write and say, give me a riff on this, and I would make a voice recording and she would make the first draft, and it was such a fun, beautiful collaboration to write the book. And I'm looking forward. I spit 3 times over the left shoulder to the second book as well. That's a superstition for making sure things go according to the flow.
There's a question in the chat for you.
Oh, I love it. Thanks. Can you speak about how you work with entities in the unseen a little more? Yeah. Part of the background of that for me is working with Betsy Bergstrom's curse removal and compassionate depossession, and Andrea Bosbach-Largent's some of her spirit work and Vola work. Biodynamically, this word biodynamic means that there is life moving through the body. There are tides, there's the breath of life. And so even just in this very moment, if you tune into the nature around you, it's living and breathing in a different way than the walls of the house or the floor of the house or items made by humans. There's a breath of life going through living things that happens in human bodies as well. And as a practitioner, when you've got hands on a person or you're working virtually, you can begin to sense, show me the person themselves and show me what's extra that's come in along with them. The extra that has come in can come in at any time in life, usually comes in along with terror or something incredibly intense that's going on when we as humans call out for help, and the ones who are disembodied and nearby come to help. And they may not be favorable for us, And they may, however, stay for a long time because our culture doesn't have practices of inviting them to leave. And so, with greatest respect and with greatest thanks, those ones can be invited to move on. And there are questions you can ask to help clarify who's who and what's behind the symptom that you're working with. This tends to come up when people have more of an awareness of self. And you can begin to discern who's me and who's extra. What else would you like to ask about that? Anything?
Sorry, I'm fumbling with my phone here, trying to get the mute on. What else would I like to ask? It's just not something that I hear addressed very often in trainings. And I feel like it's so important, and it's certainly something I've experienced in my own life. So it's really just to hear it be spoken about from a place that just makes it ordinary and totally normal and accessible and workable and
Yeah.
part of our everyday language. Just our capacity to work in those realms and clear what needs to be cleared, and knowing that that's part of the training is soothing for my soul.
Great. Yeah. I just love that Paulette Robinson is part of our groups because she perceives these things so much more easily than I do. Even though I'm growing every day with my perceptional skills. And it turns out that the other teachers of alchemical alignment, they come with their vast capacities. And so it's exciting that as a person moves toward embodiment of spirit, you can differentiate between healthy light and healthy dark. Like a womb space needs healthy dark for a baby to grow. Like kidneys and adrenals need healthy dark sleep to re-regulate. Like cave time, yin time, healthy dark feminine, which would begin to beg the question, so, what is unhealthy light and unhealthy dark? And what's shadow light and shadow dark? Which may just be unacceptable things that I've pushed out of my experience, but by the time I attend to them, they may actually have gifts in them. And so that's all part of our worldview.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so cool. And I would say parasites or cord attachments or family members living inside and feeding off of a self is something that's not unfamiliar in these rooms. Any number of powerful healers have had that as a childhood experience of needing to fuel family systems or needing to fuel a parent with a vortex of need, unfinished, unmet need, or unfinished threat responses that already from conception forward, from the womb forward, they're already powerfully channeling healing energies. Fascinating question for any healer. Do you have choice in that? And did you ever get to unhook from that? How does one do that? I'm still learning. Just in a session yesterday, I had a pyramid inside of myself, and I saw that one of my vortices of need had moved out, a family member, and how I had moved in a friend. And I was like, oh, wow. And then a new friend is just about ready to move in. And I was like, wait, how do I do this? How do I do this? Show me me. Show me me being in here and not falling into the old pattern that I know so well. So I'm here to say it's ongoing, and we got some powerful methods, practitioners, people in this group. We also do some group work, which is so fun and amazing, because one-on-one sometimes is not quite as powerful as we might need for some of the deeper, darker things that are happening. A recent fun thing is an oracle circle, where there's the ability for listening for spirit level or other level insight for the sake of a seeker, which is different than having a family constellations type with representations. We're having a lot of fun over here with the things that we're developing.
It all sounds great.
Does it? Yeah. 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 I have a map of alchemical alignment right over here, and I immediately look over and I see Gisele's program in Brazil. It's so amazing to remove the thought forms from the program that are inappropriate for Brazil, to give Gisele the program to rework so that it doesn't feel like what do you call it? Patriarchal, masculine, out of balance, oppressor people are bringing yet another thing to a foreign country. Gisele is from there, and she gets to transmute the program until it is in a language that is resonant with the people there. That's one of the great excitements of having a feminine based model. It's not a top down. As much as possible, we endeavor to move toward a bottom up model so that there's a meeting of what's true in present time in the fractal of creation of that group or that country. And so also to consider, wow, how will the book be translated? And are there going to be changes needed because certain ones of our thought forms might not work for the culture over there? That's still to be discussed, and it's part of our growing edge. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Gisele,
Yeah.
how about maybe saying a little bit about the basic program that's online versus in person, just so that it gets to be here on the recording?
I think you're the expert on that. Will you say a thing about how
I can
you
say
feel about that?
yeah. So for people who might be curious, then what does the basic program, the training look like? Brigit already mentioned that Varia is teaching a 101, which is a simplified introduction to this work in 6, 2-hour classes. Absolutely wonderful. I've been watching her just to find out what gets taught for the students who are coming into the full program from having taken that. And then from there, you have 2 options. There are going to be in-person classes. There are 4 levels. One will be taking place in Maine. The other will be taking place in Maryland. And so those are 4-day long each. And we are just coming off of bringing the classes from a 7-module plan, because when 2020 came around, those 4 levels that were being taught in person had to fit into a Zoom format, and being online all day was a little tough. So the four levels became 7 modules. So they're shorter. They're 3 days long each, and they were running from 10 to 4 each day. And so right now, I just finished teaching the 7 modules with Joseph, and he's going to continue to teach an online 7-module basic program for those who don't want to or can't travel. And for the ones who would love to have some in-person classes again, I'll be doing those. And I think that's the plan right now, other than what Gisele is building down in Brazil. And we have another teacher, Tel, who's also been so instrumental in making that transition to online, that she's been teaching the modules as well through this past year. Anything else besides that that you would add, just in case people are wondering, how do you take a class if you're interested?
Yeah, exactly. When I talk, I get so involved in the theory and the practice of it and what we're actually doing, and I start moving toward the most intense subjects, which is why I'm no longer appropriate for the first year program, 'cause I will default toward existential discussions and the most esoteric and the most unseen or terrifying or something like that. And it's so great to have people like Varia, Joseph, and Kimberly, and Tel, and Gisele who are available to teach the beginning steps at this time and have the discipline to stay with the subject matter. It's so great. It's interesting. People might think, oh, it's a bodywork training program, which is what it started out as. And so I used to call it bodywork for trauma resolution and embodiment of spirit, but we changed it to somatic work because we had so many people coming who were psychotherapists or coaches or mental health or medical health practitioners in certain ways who weren't necessarily doing a hands-on bodywork practice. And so we had to change it to somatic work, which was absolutely perfect because by the time we went online and nobody was doing hands-on work during the online time, we energetically were able to make contact with our partners, the people, the students with their partners, and then also internationally, we had students from all over the world. And so people were able to work with each other in practice pairs from all over the world energetically through the online model. And there's some people who need continuing education credits for whatever for bodywork specifically. That's all we have so far in terms of continuing education credits. And they would have to show that they were doing the work in person with hands-on in order to fulfill those. However, we have so many different practitioners that we have developed such a wide variety of skills from hands-on to virtual sessions. The way the alchemical alignment core practices and principles are being implemented in so many different practices around the world of different practitioners is very exciting to watch the development of all of that. Yeah. And so my point was, when you are applying to an online or an in-person class, first of all, the online program is almost full. Second of all, the in-person classes, you can go through with no touch through the whole in-person class because there will be people who cannot be touched or touch, and they're going to find the absolute perfect partners in the room who need to practice. Wow, how would I have a session with you if I couldn't touch you, if I have a touch practice, which turns out is part of trauma informed practitioner training. How do you not touch your client who is suddenly terrified and needs you not to touch them? Are you able to have the skills to do something else, practice other things on your way to touch, which could take weeks or months? And you might say, well, I'm not the right practitioner for them if I have a hands-on practice. The amazing answer could be you may be the perfect practitioner for them. They just need to get there. And do you have the time, the patience, the courage, the ability to move toward your best work with them when they're able to receive it from you? So that's why I would advocate an in-person class, even if you're not a touch practitioner. And if you are a touch practitioner, it's actually great, no matter who you are, to go to an in-person class. Yeah. And the online ones are convenient for people from around the world, which is also why it's almost full now, because we have a momentum already going for the online program. So I invite everyone to apply for the in-person classes in Maine and Maryland. What else could I say? We have a monthly healing session that happens once a month, pretty much around the full moon time. And people that have been coming to those over years have gotten more and more used to the style of work that we do at Alchemical Alignment with choice embedded in it. However, I do lead those, and so you can get a fair amount of work done if you're an advanced practitioner. I do use representations for that, which means that you can tune in to a small object that will be representing whatever we're agreeing that it represents. You have a doable piece of a somatic experience, and you're able to move off of that in order to re-regulate or pause, stabilize, etc. And we have a different subject every month. And so I'm demonstrating with different subjects over and over and over again how it's possible to do small bits of somatic work. Also in a group setting, it's possible to do that. Yeah. I think we may have covered everything. Wide variety of practitioners, lots of things going on in the training, first year, second year, developing third, or not third year, but other adjunct classes. I'm supposed to develop a freeze class. It will be coming one day for 6 classes, short classes about freeze itself, so that we can spend more time dropping in and also having experiential meditations and exercises to work with freeze specifically. I think we'll be wrapping up unless somebody has more questions or comments. It's been a pleasure being with you. And so I think I've forgotten to mention the alchemicalalignment.com website is where you would find more information. Please come and sign up for the newsletter if you would like to. And we do have an online school space called Maintain Alignment. It will be developing more and more programs over time. Check out the page for that on the website and see what's the latest news there. And thank you for coming.